The morning started like any other at Kensington Palace, with the soft chiming of bells marking 7 o'clock. Guard William Thompson adjusted his ceremonial hat one final time before checking his watch and taking his position at the main entrance. At 28 years old, he had been serving as a royal guard for 5 years, and every single day still filled him with the same sense of pride and purpose that had driven him to pursue this career. William's dark blue uniform was perfectly pressed, each button polished to gleaming perfection. His black leather boots had been shined until they reflected the palace's grand architecture like mirrors. His posture was straight as an arrow, shoulders squared with military precision, hands positioned exactly as his training manual specified. Every detail of his appearance met the exacting standards expected of someone trusted to protect the royal family. The path that had led William to this prestigious position began in his childhood in the small village of Thornfield, nestled in the English countryside. Growing up as the son of a blacksmith, he had always dreamed of something greater than the quiet village life that surrounded him. His grandfather, Albert Thompson, had served briefly as a palace guard during his youth in the 1960s, and his stories had captivated young William's imagination for hours on end. No, in those days, William, his grandfather, would say, settling into his favorite armchair by the fire, being a royal guard meant something special. We weren't just soldiers or security guards. We were guardians of history, protectors of tradition. Every morning when I put on that uniform, I knew I was part of something bigger than myself. Those stories had planted seeds of ambition in William's heart that grew stronger with each passing year. While other village children dreamed of becoming footballers or rock stars, William Thompson dreamed of standing guard at palace gates, of serving the crown with honor and distinction. His bedroom walls were covered with photographs of royal ceremonies, newspaper clippings about the royal family, and postcards from London that he had collected obsessively. The palace was buzzing with unusual activity that Tuesday morning in late October. Staff members hurried back and forth through the corridors and courtyards, their arms full of papers, flowers, and various organizational materials. Princess Charlotte, though only 9 years old, had already shown remarkable initiative in organizing a special charity fundraiser for children, spending long periods in hospitals across the United Kingdom. The event planning had been going on for weeks, and today marked an important milestone in the preparation process. The princess would be meeting with representatives from several children's hospitals, along with organizers from major charitable foundations, to finalize details for what promised to be one of the most successful youth-led fundraising efforts. In recent royal history, William had observed Princess Charlotte many times during his various duty assignments around the palace grounds. Unlike the formal, distant figures he had imagined royal children to be, Charlotte was remarkably warm and personable. She possessed a bright, genuine smile that seemed to light up whatever room she entered, and she had an unusual gift for making everyone around her feel seen and valued. The princess had a habit that particularly impressed William and his fellow guards. While many important people walked past security personnel as if they were invisible fixtures, Charlotte always acknowledged their presence. She would offer cheerful waves, ask about their families, remember details from previous conversations, and generally treat the palace staff with the same courtesy. She showed 2 visiting dignitaries as the morning hours progressed toward midday. William began to notice dark, heavy clouds gathering ominously in the sky above London. The weather forecast he had checked that morning had mentioned the possibility of rain, but meteorologists had suggested it would likely hold off until evening. William silently hoped their predictions would prove accurate, as he still had 6 more hours remaining in his scheduled Royal Guards. Royal Guards received extensive training for maintaining their posts in all types of weather conditions. During his initial training period in Scotland, William had endured freezing rain, snow, high winds, and blazing summer heat. The instructors made it clear that weather discomfort was simply part of the job, never an acceptable reason for abandoning one's post or showing any sign of weakness. Around 11 o'clock in the morning, the first tentative raindrops began to fall from the increasingly gray sky. William instinctively pulled his shoulders back even straighter and kept his eyes focused directly ahead. Following the protocols that had been drilled into him through countless hours of training, a royal guard never showed weakness, never displayed discomfort. No matter what challenges nature might present, the rain began as nothing more than a light drizzle that barely dampened his uniform fabric. William initially thought this might be just a brief shower that would pass quickly, leaving him dry and comfortable for the remainder of his shift. He had certainly experienced much worse weather conditions during his rigorous training exercises in the Scottish Highlands, where instructors had deliberately scheduled outdoor drills during the most challenging weather possible. He could still hear the voice of Sergeant Mills, his primary training instructor, echoing in his memory. A true guard stands tall and maintains perfect discipline, regardless of wind, rain, snow, or blazing heat. Your comfort is irrelevant. Your duty to the crown is everything. If you cannot handle a little weather discomfort, then find yourself another career path immediately. By noon, the gentle drizzle had transformed into a steady, persistent rainfall. Water droplets rolled continuously down William's face, but his training prevented him from making any movement to wipe them away. His uniform was gradually becoming saturated with moisture, and he could feel the dampness beginning to seep through the fabric to his skin underneath. Despite the growing discomfort, he remained as motionless as a bronze statue, faithfully guarding the palace entrance with unwavering dedication. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the rain had transformed from steady precipitation into a proper downpour that showed no signs of stopping. Water streamed down William's face in continuous rivulets like tears, but his eyes remained fixed straight, ahead with unwavering focus. His dark blue ceremonial uniform was now so thoroughly soaked that it had turned almost black, and the heavy fabric clung uncomfortably to his body beneath. Every step that palace workers took near his position created splashes that sent additional water cascading over his already completely drenched boots. The leather had absorbed so much moisture that William could feel water squishing around his toes with every slight shift of weight. Though he was careful never to move enough for anyone to notice his discomfort, palace staff members continued to rush past William with colorful umbrellas and waterproof raincoats, their faces showing various degrees of sympathy and concern. A few newer employees, particularly recent hires who had never witnessed a royal guard enduring such harsh weather conditions, looked genuinely worried about William standing motionless in the pouring rain. However, the more experienced palace workers simply went about their daily business with practiced efficiency. These veteran staff members had worked at the palace long enough to witness royal guards enduring far worse conditions than a simple rainstorm. They had seen guards maintain their posts during blizzards that left several inches of snow on their shoulders, during summer heat waves that caused perspiration to pour down their faces, and during windstorms that threatened to knock over anyone not properly braced. William's stomach issued a long, rumbling growl that he hoped no one else could hear over the sound of the falling rain. He had eaten his last meal at 6 o'clock that morning, a simple breakfast of toast, eggs, and tea, and now over 9 hours had passed without any food whatsoever. Royal Guard regulations strictly prohibited eating or drinking while on active duty, even during the longest and most challenging shifts. The irony was not lost on William that his throat felt parched and dry despite being completely surrounded by water. Raindrops continuously hit his lips and ran into his mouth, but the small amounts of water only served to remind him of his growing thirst rather than satisfying it. His body was crying out for proper hydration and nourishment, but duty demanded that he ignore these basic human needs. The young guard's thoughts inevitably drifted back to his intensive training period, particularly the harsh lessons taught by Sergeant Mills, a weathered veteran with over 30 years of distinguished royal service. Mills had been legendary among the guards for his uncompromising standards and his ability to prepare new recruits for the most challenging aspects of their future careers. During one particularly memorable training exercise, Sergeant Mills had ordered the entire class of new recruits to stand at attention in freezing rain for over 4 hours without moving. Several of the trainees had complained about the cold, the discomfort, and what seemed like unnecessary cruelty. Mills had responded with words that still echoed clearly in William's memory years later. Listen carefully, because I will only explain this once. Mills had shouted over the sound of the storm. Your comfort does not matter. Your personal needs do not matter. Your complaints certainly do not matter. The safety and security of the royal family is the only thing that counts. If you cannot handle standing in a little water and cold air, then pack your bags and find yourself another career immediately. Those harsh but truthful words echoed through William's mind as another powerful gust of wind drove cold raindrops directly into his face with stinging force. He had chosen this career path with full knowledge of the sacrifices it would require. Every royal guard understood from their first day of training that duty to the crown came before personal comfort, personal needs, and personal desires. This was not merely a job that someone performed for a paycheck, it was a calling that demanded complete dedication, total sacrifice, an unwavering commitment to something far greater than oneself. William had embraced this philosophy wholeheartedly, and even now, standing in increasingly miserable conditions, he felt pride in his ability to endure hardship for the sake of his sacred duty. A large delivery truck rumbled through the palace. Gateson hit a massive puddle that had formed near William's position, sending a wave of muddy water splashing across his legs and soaking his trousers even more thoroughly. The truck driver, realizing what had happened, rolled down his window and waved apologetically while shouting something that was lost in the sound of rain and engine noise. William, however, could not acknowledge the driver's gesture in any way. Royal guards on active duty were trained to function like living statues, never reacting to anything happening around them unless it represented a direct threat to the safety and security of the royal family they were sworn to protect. At 4:30 in the afternoon, something caught William's attention from the corner of his eye, though his training prevented him from turning his head to investigate directly. A small figure had appeared at one of the palace windows on the second floor, and even through his peripheral vision, William could sense that someone was watching him intently. It was Princess Charlotte. She seemed to be studying him with the kind of focused attention that suggested genuine concern. The 9-year-old princess had been diligently working on her
afternoon study
in her private tutoring room when the sight of the guards standing motionless in the heavy rain first caught her attention. Charlotte had seen William Thompson many times before during her daily activities around the palace, and she had always thought he looked remarkably serious and important in his perfectly pressed ceremonial uniform. However, today something about witnessing him standing completely soaked while maintaining his rigid professional posture made her young heart fill with an overwhelming sense of sadness and concern. The innocent compassion that had been carefully nurtured by her parents and tutors was now being stirred by the sight of someone suffering silently in service to her family. Charlotte pressed her small hand against the cool glass of the window and watched in fascination as rainwater streamed continuously down William's stoic face. She could see that his uniform was completely saturated, and she noticed how he occasionally shivered despite his obvious efforts to remain perfectly still. The image troubled her deeply in a way she had never experienced before. The princess had always been taught about the concepts of duty and responsibility through her comprehensive royal education, but seeing someone actually endure physical discomfort and hardship for the sake of those abstract principles made all of her previous lessons feel suddenly real and meaningful. Her young heart, naturally inclined toward empathy and kindness, was deeply moved by William's dedication. Charlotte had been raised by Prince William and Catherine to understand that many people worked extremely hard to keep the royal family safe, comfortable, and secure. Her parents had made special efforts to ensure their children understood that royal privilege came with corresponding responsibilities toward those who served them. These lessons had always been important to Charlotte, but now they were taking on a much more personal and immediate significance. After watching William struggle against the elements for several long minutes, Princess Charlotte made a decision that would surprise everyone in the palace and ultimately change the course of that difficult day. She quietly left her comfortable study room and began walking purposefully through the long, echoing corridors of Kensington Palace, her small footsteps creating a soft tapping sound on the polished marble floors. The palace corridors were lined with centuries of royal portraits, elegant furniture, and priceless artwork. But Charlotte paid no attention to these familiar surroundings as she made her way toward the kitchen area with determined focus. Her young mind was entirely occupied with thoughts of how she might help the dedicated guard who was enduring such harsh conditions on behalf of her family. The palace kitchen was always a hub of bustling activity, with multiple staff members preparing meals, organizing supplies, and coordinating the complex logistics required to feed the royal household and their many guests. However, when Princess Charlotte appeared in the doorway, the head cook, Mrs. Henderson, immediately noticed her presence and set aside her current tasks. Mrs. Henderson was a kind, motherly woman in her mid-50s who had been working in the royal kitchens for over 20 years. She had watched Princess Charlotte grow from a tiny toddler into the thoughtful, caring child she was today. She had developed a special fondness for the young princess's curious nature and genuine concern. For others, "Good afternoon, Your Royal Highness," Mrs. Henderson said with a warm, welcoming smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "What brings you to visit us in the kitchen today? Are you perhaps hungry for an early afternoon snack?" Charlotte looked up at the kind woman who had prepared countless meals for her throughout her young life, and who always made sure to include her favorite foods whenever possible. "Mrs. Henderson, I need your help with something very special and important. There's a guard outside who has been standing in this terrible rain for a very long time. He looks cold and tired and miserable. Can we possibly make him some hot tea?" Request immediately melted Mrs. Henderson's heart completely. In her 2 decades of palace service, she had witnessed numerous acts of royal kindness and compassion. But this particular gesture from such a young member of the royal family touched her more deeply than she could have imagined possible. "Of course, Your Royal Highness," she replied without any hesitation whatsoever. "We can certainly prepare the finest tea for the guard. Would you like some biscuits to accompany the tea? Perhaps some of those lovely shortbread cookies that were baked fresh this morning?" Princess Charlotte nodded eagerly, her eyes lighting up with excitement at the prospect of helping someone in need. "Yes, please. That sounds perfect. And maybe we could find a warm, dry towel as well? He looks terribly wet standing out there in all that rain." Charlotte's concern was absolutely genuine and completely pure. Emerging from the natural compassion that her parents had worked so carefully to nurture, she wasn't thinking about palace protocols, royal procedures, or potential complications. She simply saw another human being who needed help and wanted to provide it in whatever way she could. William Thompson was entering his 6th consecutive hour standing in the relentless pouring rain when he heard the distinctive indicio sound of the palace's heavy main door opening behind him. The massive wooden door, with its ornate brass fixtures and centuries of history, created a particular creaking sound that he had become intimately familiar with during his years of service at various palace entrances. He couldn't turn his head to investigate who might be emerging from the palace, but his trained ears assumed it was probably another staff member, hurrying through the increasingly miserable weather to complete some urgent task. However, the sound of small, careful footsteps on the wet stone pavement made him curious. Though his rigorous training kept his eyes focused directly forward as regulations demanded, came a sweet, unmistakably young voice that William recognized immediately, causing his heart to skip several beats in rapid succession. His pulse quickened dramatically as he realized that Princess Charlotte herself was speaking directly to him. In his 5 years of dedicated service as a royal guard, no member of the royal family had ever addressed him personally while he was performing his official duties. Princess Charlotte stepped carefully around from behind William's rigid position to face him directly, holding a beautiful silver tray steady in her small hands, despite the rain that was now beginning to soak her own elegant clothes. She looked up at the tall, imposing guard with his kind eyes and rain-streaked face, her expression filled with genuine concern and compassion. "I've been watching you from my window upstairs," she said gently, her voice carrying clearly over the sound of falling rain. "You've been standing in this absolutely awful weather for such a terribly long time. I could see how hard you've been working, and it made me feel very sad to watch you suffering out here." William desperately wanted to respond appropriately, to thank the young princess for her unexpected concern and kindness. But the strict protocols of his position demanded complete silence during active duty. He could only continue looking straight ahead while this remarkable child stood before him, expressing genuine care and empathy in her sweet, innocent voice. The princess seemed to understand intuitively that William was unable to speak while performing his guard duties, and she continued her conversation without expecting any verbal response from him. "I know you probably can't talk while you're working so hard to keep us safe, but I wanted you to know that I can see how dedicated you are to your job. My parents have taught me that we should always appreciate and thank the people who work so hard to help keep our family secure." Raindrops continued to fall steadily onto the delicate china cup that sat on Charlotte's silver tray, mixing with the perfectly prepared hot tea that Mrs. Henderson had brewed with such careful attention to detail. The princess seemed completely unconcerned about the fact that she was rapidly getting soaked by the same rain that had been tormenting William for hours. Her focus remained entirely on the loyal guard, who had maintained his post with such unwavering dedication, despite the increasingly harsh weather conditions. The princess's genuine concern for William's well-being was evident in every word she spoke and every compassionate glance she directed toward his rain-soaked figure. "I brought you some lovely hot tea and fresh biscuits," Charlotte explained, lifting the ornate silver tray slightly to show him its contents. "I know you probably can't enjoy them right now because you're working so diligently, but I was wondering if perhaps you might be able to take just a tiny break, maybe just for 1 or 2 minutes?" The gathering of palace staff members near the main entrance had grown larger as word of this extraordinary scene spread throughout the building. Many employees had tears forming in their eyes as they witnessed their young princess displaying such remarkable compassion and maturity. Mr. Andrews, the distinguished head butler, found himself particularly moved by the unprecedented display of kindness in all his extensive years of faithful service to the royal household. He had never witnessed anything quite as touching as this moment. Between the 9-year-old princess and the dedicated guard, who had endured hours of miserable weather without complaint, William's eyes briefly met Princess Charlotte's gaze. In that fleeting moment of connection, she could clearly see the gratitude, surprise, and deep emotion reflected in his expression. Although he remained silent and motionless as his training required, his face softened noticeably, revealing the caring human being behind the professional facade that duty demanded he maintain. The princess smiled warmly and encouragingly, completely understanding that her heartfelt gesture had successfully reached him despite the formal barriers that separated them. Her natural emotional intelligence allowed her to recognize that sometimes the most meaningful communication happened without words, through simple acts of human kindness and genuine concern for others. "I have what I think might be a good idea," Charlotte said thoughtfully, glancing around the immediate area with the problem-solving mind that would serve her well in future royal responsibilities. "There's a lovely covered area just a few steps away from here, right under that beautiful stone archway. Would it be possible for you to stand there instead? You would still be doing your important job perfectly, but you wouldn't have to get any wetter than you already are." For a moment that felt like forever, Princess Charlotte and Guard William looked at each other through the falling rain. The young princess's dress was now soaked, and her hair clung to her face, but she didn't seem to care. Her only concern was for the man who had been standing faithfully at his duty, despite the terrible weather. "You know what?" Charlotte said with sudden determination. "I think rules are important, but kindness is more important. And right now, kindness means you should have that tea while it's still hot." Before anyone could object, the princess picked up the teacup with both small hands and held it toward William. "Please," she said simply, "just a few sips. I won't tell anyone it was breaking the rules if you won't." The gathered staff members held their breath. This was an unprecedented situation. Royal guards were never supposed to eat or drink while on duty, but here was a member of the royal family personally offering refreshment and essentially giving permission to bend the rules. William looked down at the earnest face of the young princess. In her eyes he saw not the future queen, but simply a caring child who wanted to help someone in need. The weight of protocol seemed to lift from his shoulders as he realized that Sometimes human compassion was more important than rigid rules. Slowly, carefully, William reached out and accepted the teacup. His cold, wet hands wrapped around the warm china, and he felt heat flowing back into his frozen fingers. He brought the cup to his lips and took a small sip. The hot tea felt like liquid, sunshine flowing down his throat. "Is it good?" Charlotte asked hopefully, raindrops sparkling on her eyelashes like tiny diamonds. William nodded slightly, the first movement he had made in hours. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness," he said quietly, his voice rough from cold and disuse. "Is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me." Charlotte beamed with joy at his words. "My grandmother always says that a cup of tea can fix almost anything," she replied. "She taught me that when people work hard for our family, we should make sure they know how grateful we are." The princess then did something that surprised everyone even more. She stepped closer to William and gently took his free hand in both. Of hers, her small, warm hands wrapped around his cold, wet fingers. "You're shivering," she observed with concern. "And your hands are like ice." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward with a thick, dry towel that she had brought from the palace. "Here, Your Royal Highness," she said, offering it to Charlotte. But instead of taking the towel for herself, Charlotte accepted it and carefully placed it around William's shoulders. "There," she said with satisfaction. "That should help warm you up a little bit." William felt tears mixing with the rainwater on his face. In all his years of training and service, no one had prepared him for this moment. The simple humanity of a child had broken through all his professional barriers and touched his heart in a way that would change him forever. "Your Royal Highness," he said softly, "in 5 years of service, I have never received such kindness. You have reminded me why I chose this job, not just to follow rules, but to serve a family that truly cares about people." Charlotte smiled brightly. "That's exactly right," she said. "Rules are there to help us, but they shouldn't stop us from being kind to each other. That's what my parents taught me, and that's what I want to remember when I grow up." Mr. Andrews, who had been watching with growing amazement, stepped forward. "Your Royal Highness," he said gently, "perhaps we should get you back inside, where it's warm and dry." Charlotte looked up at the head butler, then back at William. "Will you be okay now?" she asked with genuine concern. William nodded, still holding the warm teacup. "Thanks to you, Your Royal Highness, I feel warmer than I have all day. Not just my body, but my heart too." As Princess Charlotte was gently escorted back inside the palace, she turned one last time to wave at William. He stood there with the towel around his shoulders and the warm teacup in his hands, looking like a different person than the rigid statue he had been just minutes before. A simple act of human kindness had transformed both the guard and the princess. Word of Charlotte's gesture spread quickly throughout the palace. Staff members who had witnessed the scene shared the story with others, and soon everyone was talking about the young princess who had stood in the rain to comfort a loyal guard. The tale reached Prince William and Catherine, who felt immense pride in their daughter's compassionate actions. When Charlotte's parents heard about what had happened, they made a special trip to find their daughter. They found her in her room, changing into dry clothes with the help of her nanny. "Charlotte," Prince William said gently, "we heard about what you did for the guard today." The princess looked up with slightly worried eyes, wondering if she had gotten in trouble for breaking protocol. "Was it wrong, Papa? I know guards aren't supposed to move during their duty, but he looked so cold and sad standing in all that rain." Catherine knelt down beside her daughter and took her hands. "Oh, sweetheart, what you did today was absolutely right. You showed the kind of heart that will make you a wonderful leader someday. Rules are important, but compassion is even more important." Prince William nodded in agreement. He reminded us all that behind every uniform is a real person with feelings and needs. That guard will never forget your kindness, and neither will anyone else who heard about it. Meanwhile, William finished his tea and carefully set the cup back on the silver tray. The warm liquid had helped restore feeling to his body, but more importantly, Princess Charlotte's kindness had restored something in his spirit. He folded the towel neatly and stood a little taller, though now his posture came from pride rather than just training. When his replacement arrived at 6 o'clock, the other guard was amazed by William's story. "Princess Charlotte really brought you tea. In the rain, he asked in disbelief. William nodded, his face glowing with more than just warmth from the hot drink. She's only 9 years old, but she has the heart of a true queen. She taught me that our service isn't just about following rules. It's about being part of something bigger, something that cares about people. The story of that rainy Tuesday spread far beyond the palace walls. Newspapers picked up the heartwarming tale of the young princess, who had shown such maturity and compassion. People around the world were touched by Charlotte's simple act of kindness and her understanding. That duty should never override humanity. For William, that day became a turning point in his career. He continued to serve as a royal guard with the same dedication as before, but now his service came from a deeper place of connection and purpose. He never forgot the feeling of Princess Charlotte's small hands warming his cold fingers, or the way she looked at him not as a uniform, but as a person deserving of care. Years later, when Charlotte became older and took on more royal responsibilities, she would often reference that rainy day as one of her most important lessons. She learned that true leadership meant seeing and caring for every person who contributed to the family's well-being, no matter how small their role might seem. The silver tray and teacup were later placed in a special display case in the palace, commemorating the day when a 9-year-old princess taught everyone around her the true meaning of royal service. It wasn't about ceremonies or grand gestures. It was about recognizing the humanity in others and responding with kindness when kindness was needed most. William continued his career as a royal guard, eventually becoming a trainer for new recruits. He would always tell them the story of Princess Charlotte and the tea in the rain, explaining that their highest duty was not just to protect the royal family, but to be worthy of the trust and care that family showed them in return. The rain, that had seemed like such a hardship, became the backdrop for one of the most beautiful examples of compassion and connection between the royal family and those who served them. It proved that sometimes the most powerful moments come not from grand ceremonies or official events, but from simple human kindness shared between two people standing together in the rain.